Welcome. My name is Bobby Saferstein, and as Chief Program Officer for the Jewish Democratic Council of America, JDCA, I want to thank you for joining today's conversation with Delaware Congresswoman Sarah McBride. As the voice of Jewish voters, JDCA is working to elect Democrats who share our values, and we're honored to be joined by one of them, a Democratic trailblazer and the only openly trans member of Congress, Delaware Congresswoman Sarah McBride. I first met Congresswoman McBride back in 2014 while we were both fighting for LGBTQ equity and equality in the Jewish world and beyond. By then, the Congresswoman had already broken down barriers by serving as the first openly trans person to work at the White House. She followed this by helping to pass hate crimes legislation protecting transgender Delawareans and by serving as the national spokesperson for the Human Rights Campaign, before continuing her wave of firsts by becoming the first trans woman to speak at a national party convention, to be elected state senator, and most recently, to serve in Congress. In her first 6 months in the House, Representative McBride has set a shining example for how Democrats can stand up to MAGA, declaring that she didn't get elected to talk about the bathrooms I use. Congresswoman McBride has dismissed anti-trans bigotry directed at her and others, instead focusing on delivering an economy that works for all Americans and fighting the MAGA agenda, including her strong opposition to the big ugly bill that stripped healthcare and food assistance, to name just but a few, from tens of millions of Americans. And in the last few days alone, Representative McBride achieved something unthinkable in today's political climate, introducing and passing a bipartisan bill in the House unanimously, which aims to make it possible for people of more diverse financial backgrounds to take advantage of investment opportunities. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for standing up, showing up, and blazing a trail for everyone, including those who cannot show up themselves right now for fear of reprisal. Being the first is never easy, but because you are the first, there will be a second and a third and a fourth, and so on. With that, I'm delighted to welcome JDCA CEO Halie Soifer to begin today's conversation.
Thank you, Bobby, and thanks to those of you joining us today, and a special thanks to Congresswoman McBride. Congresswoman, we want to thank you for your leadership and understand exactly why it is you ran for Congress. You were on the ballot for the House, the same difficult election that Donald Trump just won last November. More and more, we hear about distrust of Congress. We hear all sorts of things. There's a lot of emotion surrounding the role of Congress today. What motivated you to run for office, and what has surprised you the most about working in Congress?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. Bobby, thank you for that incredible introduction. Halie, thank you so much for your leadership and for facilitating this conversation. It is truly an honor to be here. This coalition of Jewish Democrats has been so critical to our victories. It's been so critical to keeping Democrats committed to our values. And of course, at this particular moment where there is so much toxicity in our politics, where hatred, including anti-Semitism, feels like it's at an all-time high in modern history. The work that you all do has never been more important and probably more challenging emotionally as we navigate these times. And I just want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for everything in a moment where it can be difficult to show up as ourselves in a whole multitude of identities in the political space. For me, my journey to Congress, my journey to public office, in so many ways has been a journey back to hope. And I know we don't talk about that word very often anymore in our politics, but as a young person struggling with how I fit into this world, feeling alone and worried whether the heart of this country was big enough to love someone like me, I faced a real crisis of hope. And in that crisis of hope as a young person, I went searching for solutions. I went searching for examples of our world becoming kinder and more just and more inclusive. And I found a little glimmer of hope as I stumbled across history books. And as I read those history books and saw that the through line of every chapter was the story of advocates, activists, and a handful of courageous and effective elected officials working together to right the wrongs of our past, to address injustice, to bring people from the shadows and the margins of society into the circle of opportunity. And I found hope in that story. I found hope in the possibilities in our politics. And so I got involved. But of course, for most of my life, I never thought that someone like me living openly and authentically could ever serve in public office. And it wasn't until really 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017 that I had the experiences for me that both propelled me to want to run for office and to comfort me that there was a place for someone like me in politics. Around that time, we started to see trans people running for office and winning, people like Danica Rome in Virginia. But it was also around that time that I had the experience that led me to decide that, as passionate as I was about LGBTQ rights and the work that I was doing at the Human Rights Campaign, that the cause of my life is to expand access to healthcare to everyone who needs it. Because around that time, I served as the caregiver to the man who would become my husband, Andy, during his battle with cancer. And, you know, for anyone who's been diagnosed with cancer on this Zoom, for anyone who's had a loved one diagnosed with cancer, it feels like a punch in the gut, unlike anything you've ever experienced. And from the first moment after Andy received that diagnosis, he was 25 at the time, right? You don't expect to hear that word. You hope to never hear that word. You certainly don't expect to hear that word in your 20s. But from the first moment after hearing that word, we both knew how lucky we were. We knew how lucky he was to have health insurance that would allow him to get care that would hopefully save his life. And we both knew how lucky we were to have flexibility with our jobs that allowed him to focus on the full-time job of getting care and me to focus on the full-time job of being there by his side to care for him through surgery and radiation and chemotherapy, to love him, to support him as a partner. And then when he found out that his cancer was terminal, to be there by his side, to marry him, and just a couple of days later to walk him to his passing. And up until his last breath, he knew how lucky he was. And I ran for office, first for the state Senate and then for Congress, because I do not believe that in the wealthiest, most developed nation on earth, that time and that ability to get care should be a matter of luck. I believe it should be the law of the land. And it's going to take Congress to get there. It's going to take Congress to guarantee affordable health care for everyone. It's going to take Congress to pass the kind of policies that we need so that people don't have to sacrifice their financial security when they get diagnosed with an illness, policies like paid family and medical leave. It's going to take congressional action. And while Congress feels so broken in this moment, while politics is so toxic, we need people who know how to make change, who know that it's hard and often unfair, who know how to deliver, and who want to be a constructive, productive part of the solution, and who want to push back on, and this is the most jarring thing about being in Congress, the reality TV show of it all. Like we have to be able to get attention in this attention economy. We have to be able to leverage our voices and our microphones to get our message out there. Attention is a means to an end, but to see so many people on the other side of the aisle for whom attention is the end, and that is jarring to see up close, and it reinforces the need for us to have serious people in Congress who want to do right by all of their constituents, who recognize that there is too little kindness and grace in the world and in our politics right now, and who want to and know how to make government work better for people.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the word grace, because you have persevered with grace and strength amid what was not exactly a warm welcome to Congress. Immediately, certain MAGA Republicans began abhorrently targeting you with discriminatory rhetoric and policies. Yet you have demonstrated, when they go low, we go high. You've been leading with your values. You've continued to serve as a trailblazer, even passing your first bipartisan bill unanimously, and serving for as an inspiration for so many of us. So, two questions. Why, in your view, do Republicans remain so fixated on targeting the LGBTQ plus community? And two, how do you still find a way to work with them, including those who have continued to talk about something as mundane as access to a bathroom?
Yeah, yeah. First of all, I think to your question, it is so important for us to make clear that it is the Republican Party that is obsessed with bathrooms. It is the Republican Party that is obsessed with pronouns, not the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party fights for everyone. We defend the rights and dignity of everyone, including, yes, trans people, but the ones who are trying to make this an issue, the ones who are hyper-focused on this, it's the Republican politicians. And I think your question gets to why they do that. And look, I think it's threefold. One is there are still a lot of questions that people have. I think there is still a knowledge gap around who trans people are that creates fertile ground for anti-equality politicians to exploit that lack of understanding. Two, I do think that we have to recognize that there is something happening. There is real pain across our country, including among men, right? And like, we should not diminish the pain of anyone. I mean, you look at the data and you look at the deaths of despair among young men. You look at the pessimism that young men feel right now. And I think that Republicans have done a good job of taking a very real experience of pain and a sense that the future is not going to be better than the past, that a lot of people across gender feel, but that, yes, young men feel. And I think that they have turned trans people into an avatar of everything that's wrong for men in society. And I think it's struck a nerve, because I think in many cases, Democrats have not done a good job of seeing the very real pain across our society, including among people that we dismiss often as privileged. And, academically, I understand where that all started, but I think it has created, unfortunately, an opening. If we are not seeing people's pain and addressing it, for Republicans to create monsters and to scapegoat others, whether it's trans people, whether it's immigrants, these people are the reason why your future is not as good. These people are a symbol of the demonization of masculinity and manhood, and it has, in the absence of us providing a counter message and a counter just empathy, quite frankly, it has allowed for Republicans to use these issues to exploit that pain and to use it for political purposes, quite frankly. And I think that that's a difficult thing for us as Democrats to talk about, but I think it's a very real phenomenon that we have to grapple with. And then the third is that they are employing the strategies as old as politics itself. And it goes along with the second point, and that is to misdirect the public's attention. They know that their economic agenda is unpopular. They know that cutting healthcare and food assistance for people is unpopular. They know that tax breaks for billionaires, it's an unpopular proposal. And in order to push forward an unpopular economic agenda in order to screw over working people in this country, they will pick vulnerable communities to fearmonger and to scapegoat around. And that is part of this strategy of division and misdirection. Every single time you hear them say the word trans, look at what they're doing with their grubby hands, because I guarantee you they're picking the pocket of American workers, they're fleecing seniors, they're calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme, they're gutting Medicaid, they're shredding unions in this country. The list goes on. And I think as we push back on these attacks, we have to do it in a way that continuously pulls back the curtain on a right-wing strategy that is using vulnerable people as political pawns in order to enrich themselves, consolidate power, and divert the public's attention from those efforts.
Wow. So you have worked, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I will just add on this because I think a lot of people's top of mind, and you touched on this, like a lot of people's top of mind question is about how I have to interact with all of this as an individual, as a human, right? I just talked about from a 35,000 foot level. And I think, you know, I think people benefit from hearing why I'm engaging the way I'm engaging, because I get a lot of feedback on how I engage. Some people love it on our sides. Some people don't like it, because when you are a first, your own community viscerally feels your highs, but that also means that they viscerally feel the lows and they feel the indignities. But I always tried to tell my own community as I was running, what's going to come will be a slew of indignities. There will be a slew of indignities because when you are a first, they throw indignities at you in order to provoke you. And then in order to provoke you so then they can blame you for being the disruption. To then make the case that people like you don't belong in those spaces. And any first knows that that comes. And I told my community that my job was going to be not to give these people the responses that they want, because they aren't passionate about bathroom policy. They are passionate about attention. The people who were doing this and have done this are passionate about attention for themselves. And the best way to get attention in reality TV is to pick a fight with someone. It's to throw wine in their face. That gets you a little bit of attention in one episode. The way to get attention, sustained attention in a reality TV show, a season-long story arc, is to have a beef with someone, a feud. But to have a feud, it takes two to tango. And I refuse to be used as a pawn in their pitiful effort to get attention. And so my job is to not give them the response that they need. That doesn't feel viscerally comforting to me or the community, but it is necessary. In the same way, there's a powerful scene, and I'm not comparing myself at all to what I'm about to say. There's a powerful scene in the movie 42 about Jackie Robinson, where the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers is offering him a position, and in that meeting, he's trying to provoke him. And when Jackie understandably gets angry and yells back at him, the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers is like, I need you not to do that. This is going to come and I need you not to do that. And Jackie Robinson says, you don't want me to be strong enough to fight. He says, I want you to be strong enough not to fight. Because when you are a first, if you respond to a slur with a slur, they'll only hear yours. If you respond to a punch with a punch, they'll say you're the aggressor. And when students were integrating schools in the 50s and slurs were being screamed at them as they walked into those buildings, they weren't normalizing those slurs by not responding and by walking forward with dignity and grace. No, what they were doing was they were providing the public with a visual contrast between the bullies and the bullied. A visual contrast that needed to be as stark as possible for a public that is going about their lives and is only passively seeing those images and those issues. They needed a visual contrast as clear as humanly possible. Because if those students yelled back or even spoke back, the images would be of two people. Essentially, it would look like yelling at each other. And then it would be a pox on both their houses. The public needs a visual contrast. And by rising above, by making it clear, these are the people who are being disruptors. These are the people who are focused on bathrooms. These are the people obsessed with trans people. And I am here to be serious. It provides that contrast and helps to reinforce for not only my constituents, but voters across the country as trans candidates in the future seek to run, that when trans people run, they can serve, they can be effective, they can get things done, and they will not be the ones focused on one single issue, but rather focused on everyone.
Thank you. Bobby mentioned this in the intro, but it is a huge accomplishment to have passed a bipartisan bill, especially just in your first 6 months in Congress. So I'm interested in hearing more about the Equal Opportunity for Investors Act and how you were able to achieve a bipartisan consensus. Obviously, including working with those very people that are trying to deprive you of the right to go to the bathroom.
So, first off, I'm really thrilled. The last 2 weeks have been, ironically enough, not particularly productive writ large, but productive for me. A week ago, the House passed with bipartisan support a provision of mine that is going to result in major federal investment in new technologies actually developed here in Delaware. So actually bringing more jobs here to Delaware, new technologies that reduce the energy needs of data centers. Folks probably have heard of data centers. These are these large facilities that are going to be sort of central to the technological future, including the AI advancements that we see that we have to also be very careful about. But these facilities require a ton of water to keep them cool, therefore a ton of energy. And this new technology is going to dramatically reduce the need for water and electricity that these data centers require, making them more sustainable and resulting in them pulling less on our grid and therefore helping to, in the long run, reduce energy bills for consumers who won't see the same kind of massive demand on an industrial scale by these data centers. And so we were able to pass that last week. And then earlier this week, the House passed this legislation, the Equal Opportunity for All Investors Act. So this is a bill. Bills often, when they get passed, it's a team effort. I teamed up with 2 Republicans and 1 other Democrat on this legislation. Because one of the issues that I heard, Delaware is a small state. We're a state of neighbors. We're also a state of small businesses. We have more of our workforce working for small businesses than most other states. And one of the things that I was consistently hearing from folks who are starting businesses isn't that they lacked ideas. It's that they lack the investment necessary to start their business. And in many cases, for folks who come from underrepresented communities, veterans, women, people of color, the list goes on, rural communities, access to capital is that much more difficult. And right now, the markets that fuel startups and small businesses, they require you to basically be a millionaire in order to access those markets. And there need to be safeguards because we don't want vulnerable people, retirees who are in an assisted living facility who are sitting on a retirement nest egg. We don't want someone to be able to get them into these markets to invest their money in bad schemes. But the current restrictions essentially bar knowledgeable, financially and fiscally responsible individuals who understand investment, who aren't millionaires, from being able to participate, which means that the communities that these small business owners are coming from are disproportionately shut out from the markets that fuel those small businesses, which means that they struggle to get capital. And so this legislation creates an option, an ability for people who don't necessarily meet the wealth or asset requirements to be an investor to demonstrate through an exam a level of understanding and knowledge about how to invest, to be able to participate, to diversify the investor pool in order to guarantee that a diverse entrepreneur pool can better access that capital to start a business. Because at the end of the day, I think one of the reasons why this country is facing a crisis of hope is because the American dream is increasingly unaffordable and inaccessible. At the heart of that is starting a family, buying a home. That feels like you can't do it, but it also increasingly feels challenging to start a small business. And building wealth and pursuing your dreams and starting a small business is also part of the American dream. And so we've got to make sure that folks like veterans in Sussex County and in rural communities here in Delaware, or small business owners or entrepreneurs here in Wilmington, which is an incredibly diverse city, that they have the same access to turn their ideas into reality and to start a small business and thrive based on their merits, not who they know and what family they were born into. And so we were able to work together to find what I call a Goldilocks solution, where you're still balancing access with safeguards. That's why this legislation, I believe, was able to pass with folks from the far left to the far right all voting for it, because it achieves a shared goal in a way that is responsible, that mitigates unintended consequences, but in so doing makes these markets more accessible and helps to unleash and unlock the American dream for entrepreneurs from communities who've historically been locked out. And then to your question about working with people, look, there are 5 or 6 people in the House who are professional provocateurs. The ones who are really like obsessed with trans people or with me, they can barely work with, honestly, they can't work with any Democrat, and they can hardly work with their own Republican colleagues. The rest of the Republican caucus, there are real disagreements, including on issues near and dear to my heart. But I knew that running for office meant that I was going to have to work with people who hold positions that I not only disagree with, but are hurtful to me. Because frankly, that's the reality of being an elected official. That's the extra burden that people from marginalized communities often have in going into these spaces, is that there's a reason why you're a first. It's because your community has historically been locked out, or you're underrepresented. That community has historically been excluded. And therefore, yeah, you're going to have to deal with people who do and say things that are harmful. But change making isn't always fair. Democracy is not easy. Liberal democracy is not easy. People are going to say and do things that I find offensive and hurtful. And the challenge of having a pluralistic liberal democracy is figuring out, yes, how to push back, how to fight back, but to recognize that diversity of thought, even in ways that are deeply offensive to me as a trans person, that is a feature of democracy, not a bug. But in that disagreement is the path forward, because the fact that, yes, they can say terrible things, the fact that they have that opportunity means that I have the ability, I have the freedom to share myself, to be authentic, to live my life as I know I need to, and to talk about things that the dominant position disagrees with, or that the administration disagrees with. That is the path forward, though, for me to be able to achieve freedom and opportunity and fairness for not just people like me, but for everyone in our society. And that means you got to take sometimes the bad with the good.
So earlier this month, Congress passed the big, ugly bill, which we know will strip hundreds of billions of dollars for critical programs like Medicaid and SNAP, which is food assistance, defunding rural hospitals and clinics. And, as if kicking nearly 17 million people off of Medicaid wasn't enough, it also included a provision that immediately shut down the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for LGBTQ plus youth. Now that this bill has passed, really enacting an essential part of Donald Trump's agenda, I suppose, most prevalently the extension of his tax cuts for billionaires. What is the path forward to reverse the devastating consequences of this bill? What are Democrats doing to fight back? And what can we all be doing to help in that fight?
Yeah, so this bill is devastating, and there is something in it for everyone to hate. it is dangerous, and in some cases, the legislation will be deadly. We were on the floor, and in the House, it's majority rule, and with reconciliation, it's majority rule in the Senate. There's no filibuster, and we submitted hundreds of amendments, testifying through the night. We were on the floor through the night, in committees through the night, using every delay tactic. Hakeem Jeffries obviously did what's called that magic minute and spoke longer than anyone has ever spoken, at least in modern history, on the floor of the House of Representatives to delay the bill as long as possible from passing. But unfortunately, the Republicans have the majority in the House and the Senate and the presidency, and they were able to pass this big, ugly bill. And there will be consequences from this bill. I mean, there is only, the sad reality is there's no easy button, there's no magic wand to stop all of the harm from this legislation. We're obviously working with state leaders to see what we can do to try to fill some of the holes, with nonprofits, with the private sector, to fill some of the holes around healthcare and food assistance. But the reality is they have created such a large hole in our nation's social safety net. The only entity that is capable of filling that hole is the federal government. And so it has to be part of our policy agenda to reverse these cuts. Now, obviously, we want to reverse these cuts and obviously build on the progress that we had delivered with the Affordable Care Act, for instance, focusing in on healthcare to make healthcare a reality for everyone, not a privilege for the few. But first and foremost, we have to reverse these cuts. The only way to stop the harm is ultimately to reverse these cuts. And I think the challenge for us is this passed in July. We have a year and a half until the next election. Now, Republicans delayed some of these cuts, particularly with regard to Medicaid, until after the next election, which, one, we will already see impact, right? There are already going to be health facilities that are forced to close before that in anticipation of those cuts. We already saw one announced in Nebraska the day of the vote that the expected cuts were going to result in them having to close. We're going to see state budgets having to grapple with the cuts to federal funding to Medicaid and food assistance. So we're going to see some effects. But the silver lining of the fact that Republicans delayed the cuts until after the November 2026 election is that all of us still have power in trying to stop some of the worst excesses and a lot of the harm. Because what they did is, and I think we have to focus in on the healthcare part of this bill in particular, because what this bill is, in addition to tax breaks for billionaires, it is Trump care. And Trump care means, yes, 15 to 17 million Americans without health insurance that currently have it because of cuts to Medicaid and cuts to the ACA marketplace. But it's not limited to that, because when you remove $1 trillion from the American healthcare system and you take away healthcare for millions of Americans that presently have it, there is impact for all of us, because those patients who lose coverage, they're still going to get care. They're just going to wait longer. They're going to go to the emergency room, which means they're going to get care when they're sicker and the treatment is more expensive. And in order to pay for that, the rest of us who still have health insurance, are going to have to pay higher premiums. And then on top of that, when you remove $1 trillion from the healthcare ecosystem, facilities from doctors' offices to health clinics to hospitals, particularly in rural communities that rely on Medicaid as a critical funding stream to operate, and they are already cash strapped, they will close without that money. So that's what Trump care means. It means millions more uninsured and the rest of us paying more for care and waiting longer to get it. It is a ticking time bomb, those $1 trillion in cuts. It is a ticking time bomb that the Trump administration and congressional Republicans inserted into the middle of the American healthcare system that is set to go off in 2027. That means we as Democrats and as Americans have the capacity to defuse that bomb in the November 2026 election. Because if we win the House and win the Senate, it gives us negotiating leverage with Donald Trump, who really, he could care less about the Medicaid cuts. He just wanted the tax breaks for billionaires and funding for immigration. If we have leverage, it gives us the capacity to restore that Medicaid funding, to save care for millions. But we need people to turn out. We need people to vote. We need people to elect Democrats to the House and the Senate in 2026 so that we can defuse that bomb. And that means that this fight is not over, that there's still something we can collectively do in a year and a half.
Yeah, technically 466 days till the midterms.
Counting.
Yeah, so it's like 100 days more than 1 year, not quite a year and a half. So as we look to winning elections, which certainly we are very focused on, Democrats themselves are really contemplating this idea of being a big tent and coalition, which includes progressives, moderates, everyone in between, while also maintaining our core values. And this has been particularly difficult for the Jewish community, as we've seen the rise of some progressive voices who don't share our views or values when it comes to Israel and anti-Semitism. But at the same time, we are faced with a Republican Party and a president who's exploited the rise of anti-Semitism as a pretext for advancing a political agenda that's antithetical to our values, that includes defunding higher education and deporting people without due process. So how do we find a balance appealing to moderate and centrist supporters on a range of issues, including, in your case, your strong support of Israel, your alignment with the Jewish community on all of the issues of importance to us, for which we are grateful, while not ostracizing yourself from what may perceive to be your political base in the progressive community?
Sure. First off, I have been long passionate about combating anti-Semitism, and I'm not Jewish myself, and a lot of times people will say, where does this passion come from for you? And there are a number of reasons. One, just as a trans person, as someone whose many members of my family are Jewish. My grandfather was Jewish, so not matrilineal. But I obviously care about combating prejudice in all of its forms, including against people that I care about, that I'm in community with. But my passion goes beyond that, because I truly believe that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine for all other prejudices. It is the world's longest, most pervasive prejudice. And where you find anti-Semitism, you see racism, you see homophobia, you see transphobia, if not immediately, almost inevitably. And I think it is critical for us to make clear that our progressivism includes combating anti-Semitism, that it is a real problem. It is a pervasive problem. It is a problem that spans the ideological spectrum, and it is a growing problem right now. I mean, I don't have to tell a lot of folks on the Zoom who probably are more familiar with the data than I am, some of the really disturbing trends around public opinion, particularly among younger people, on questions like, do you have a favorable opinion of Jews, right? Not even talking about Israel. Do you have a favorable opinion of Jews? And the numbers are disturbing and undeniable. And we have to be clear about that. And when we see differences of opinion about government policies, including government policies of another country, when we see those disagreements, or even the acknowledgement of the legitimacy of the only Jewish state in the country, when we see that those dynamics occur, we have to recognize and call them out for what they are. It is anti-Semitic to use anti-Semitic tropes to describe the only Jewish state in the world. It is anti-Semitic to use anti-Semitic tropes to describe supporters of Israel, to describe a support for Israel that for many Jews is inextricably linked with their religion and sense of Judaism. And we have to create space for people to have legitimate critiques of the Netanyahu government that many American Jews also feel is engaging in a way that undermines the long-term security and stability of Israel, and is creating a global dynamic that is really challenging, quite frankly, for many of my Jewish friends to have to navigate, because the Netanyahu government's behavior in specific circumstances, I think to many is certain behaviors are indefensible. And I think we have to be able to have legitimate disagreements and to call out at the same time if someone on the other side of that disagreement is engaging in anti-Semitic behavior, call it out and denounce it when it occurs. And I think that is necessary for the Democratic Party to continue to be that big tent, to continue to include voices that are critical of the Netanyahu government, and frankly, people who very understandably feel like Israel is perpetually facing an existential threat, and the dynamics that it's navigating are incomprehensible to us in the United States. Right? That is a diverse range of thought. And we can have those disagreements about specific tactics and strategies and policies without it devolving into anti-Semitic stereotypes and tropes. But that too often happens right now. Look, I think the coalition that is most welcoming is the coalition that wins. We don't have to be welcoming to explicit, to people who are committed to anti-Semitism, people who are committed to transphobia, people who are committed to racism. Yeah, we're not welcoming to those folks. But we also can't say that if there are differences of opinion on specifics around, for instance, some aspects of trans politics, that voters who are maybe with us on 80% of issues on trans issues, but disagree with me on sports, that they are bigots and that they have no place in our coalition as voters. Rejecting purity politics means rejecting purity politics. It doesn't mean betraying our values. It doesn't mean accepting prejudice, but it means recognizing that not every disagreement means that you are evil. That reasonable minds can differ on reasonable things, and reasonable minds can differ on incredibly, in some cases, deeply complicated issues, including like, what is the best strategy for Israel to defend itself? But being a big tent doesn't mean welcoming in the far right, right? Being a big tent doesn't mean welcoming in people who are apologists for Hamas. It means welcoming in reasonable thought and reasonable disagreement done with mutual respect. And too often we don't see that mutual respect in our politics across a whole host of issues.
Well, thank you. Not just from me, but we're getting a lot of clap emojis in the chat as well. Thank you for that answer. So I agree with you. We have to win this next election. So what advice do you have for Democratic activists driven by our values, like us, who are preparing to help Democrats who share our values, like you, win in 466 days in the midterm elections? That's the first question. And my last question is, what gives you hope for the future?
So my first look, I don't think the folks on this Zoom need much advice from me. The fact that you are on this Zoom means that you care, means that you are committed, means that you understand that winning elections and electing Democrats is not just a moral imperative, but an existential imperative for everything that we hold dear in this moment. Every politician always says, the upcoming election is the most important election of our lifetime, and everyone rolls their eyes. But the reality is that when you were one election away from people's healthcare being gutted, when you were one election away from election deniers being able to subvert the will of voters, when you're one election away from democracy being at grave risk, that means, yes, every election becomes the most important election of our lifetime. And so we need to knock on doors. We need to volunteer. We need to donate. We also need to maintain proximity with people who aren't already in our camp. You know, we have to build a coalition to win. And that means having conversations with people in our own lives who aren't part of the choir. And that's hard, and that's unfair, and that's frustrating, and that's all the things that we know it is. And it's necessary. Because change does not come, whether in winning an election or delivering policy or opening hearts and changing minds, if we aren't able to be in conversation with one another. It's the only way democracy can work and persist. And so that requires intentionality, because we are increasingly living amongst people who think and vote like us. We are increasingly exclusively communicating and hearing from people who think like us, whether on TV and legacy media or in newspapers or individually on our phone. And that means that being in proximity with people who aren't just like us and think just like us is increasingly challenging. And yes, it is uncomfortable, but it is the hard work before us. Winning and making change isn't going to be easy. Otherwise, we would have only been winning, and the world would be perfect. And that gets me to what gives me hope, because I think and I know we're at time, but yeah, well, I'm fine. So I'll keep going.
Great.
Because I think this is the most important thing that we all have to remember. Hope is essential for people who believe in politics. Cynicism is so in vogue right now. There's like cultural cachet you get when you are cynical, right? You show that you get it. You show that you're cooler than everything. You show that you see the world as it actually is, and it makes you look smart and it makes you look cool. You know what? It is the most corrosive force in our politics today. I don't care what side of the aisle you are on, it is destructive. There are reasons to be angry. The system isn't working for people. The American dream is increasingly unaffordable and inaccessible. There's reasons to be frustrated. There are reasons to be angry. But we can never lose hope. Because a politics of anger and bitterness and resentment, that might result into some short-term wins, maybe, if you channel it, but it is always, in the long run, regressive. In order to convince people to believe in a future that has never existed, which means that you take risk, right? It's a leap of faith to push for a world that we've never experienced, that we've never known. You can't deliver that based on just fear and anger. You need hope. You need to appeal to people's better angels. You need to make us as individuals the heroes of our stories, not just find enemies and not just put people down. And hope can be hard to come by in this moment. I'm not going to deny it. There are a lot of reasons to give up hope right now. But one of the things that I take comfort in is the simple fact that you cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness now are greater than the reasons for hopelessness at almost any other point in our history. When I first walked onto the floor of the House, it was a week after the election. Freshman Democrats, we gathered in what's called Statuary Hall, which is where the House met for the first 50 years. It was in the Capitol. It's where Abraham Lincoln served. And then together, we walked about 100 feet down a corridor, through the doors that the president enters for the State of the Union, onto the floor of the House for the first time in my life. And as you sit there in that space, with the history heavy in the air, the space where the House moved in 1857, just before the Civil War, you realize that when you step out of our present and into the shoes of the people who served throughout the course of our history, the people who in that space passed the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, the space where women got the right to vote, where Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid were created. The chairs that we sit in are the chairs that people sat in to pass the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And when you step into their shoes, into the shoes of the advocates and the activists and the everyday citizens who fought for that progress, and you step out of the present and into their time without the hindsight of history that deems everything as inevitable, you realize that they had every reason to give up. They couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's a new experience for us, because it felt like in the post-civil rights world and the post-1960s world that if we simply voted and volunteered, that change was inevitable. And we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel anymore. But that is what every previous generation of Americans faced against seemingly impossible odds much greater than the challenges and the odds that we face today. They had every reason to give up hope, but they didn't. They persevered, they summoned their hope, they found the light, and they changed the world. And I have hope today because if previous generations were able to do it, then with all of the tools that we have in our tool chest today, with more wealth and freedom than at any point throughout those challenges, then so too must we be able to summon our hope, find the light, and once again change this world.
Well, you're helping us summon our hope because, I asked you what gives you hope, but I'm going to tell everyone on the Zoom, I think that they agree with me. You give us hope. I'm frequently asked, well, who are the leaders in the Democratic Party? Of course, after we win or after we lose an election like we did in November, people are looking for the leaders. And I'm glad you mentioned Hakeem Jeffries and his amazing leadership of the House and efforts to at least stall the passage of the big ugly bill, and hopefully we'll make him speaker in 466 days. We do have great leaders, but you're one of them as well. And we are so grateful, people who have been there for many, many years and many terms, and people who just got to Congress 6 months ago are our leaders and our reason for hope and our reason to do this work to ensure that you are in the majority in 2026 and can serve as a check on this administration's agenda and lay the groundwork for Democrats winning in 28. So thank you so much for your leadership, your principled leadership, your moral clarity, your inspiring words, and just your vision for this country going forward, which we share.
Thank you so much for having me and for all the work that you do, for your special connection to Delaware, and for everyone who has taken time out of their busy weeks to join us on this Zoom today.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn things back over to our Chief Program Officer, Bobby Saferstein, to wrap up our program. And we're getting a lot of questions in the chat about, is this being recorded? Yes, it's being recorded. We're going to send it to all of you. And I have a challenge for everyone watching. Send it to 10 people, because everybody has to hear Congresswoman McBride's inspiring words. So thank you. Over to you, Bobby.
Thanks, Halie, and thank you to Congresswoman McBride again, and each of you for joining us for today's program. We agree with Representative McBride. We're not falling into that trap of cynicism, and we are finding the light. We're embracing hope, and we're taking action. And here's how you can take action with JDCA. Number one, join us for our weekly phone banks on Tuesdays from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on behalf of Abigail Spanberger in her race for Virginia governor. This is a key race to flip Virginia from red to blue and show Republicans how wildly unpopular their agenda has been. To sign up, please click on the link in the chat. Number two, visit our action center at jewishdems.org/action or click on the link in the chat to write to your members of Congress and join JDC's efforts on a myriad of issues we're facing right now, including opposing GOP-led attacks on the LGBTQ+ community and calling on Congress to codify the child tax credit. To do so, click on the link in the chat. Number 3, finally, if you're not yet a JDCA member, please consider becoming one or increasing your membership level to support our work. JDCA members access special benefits such as members-only programs with leading experts and analysts. To become a JDCA member, you got it? Click on the link in the chat. As we close out today's program, we continue to pray for the immediate release of the 50 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza and for all those innocent civilians throughout the region whose lives have been destroyed or worse, lost as a result of the ongoing war. Thank you again for joining us today. Wanting to wish you each an early Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you again soon.